about 7 reasons as to why women came to be enslaved, why it comes as the second sex, the submissive sex. It's considered till today the major Carta of women's liberation, and a lot of feminist movements have taken action towards it. They have used it in various practices, and repeatedly over time, it has come to for all sections of the society, kept slightly touched with areas, and I was like, uh, it has been translated for 22 times almost now. It was translated in 2017 and then it was translated in 2019 by Nina Kandasan. So it is Nina's translation that we will use today. And as all of you know, Nina happens to be a feminist channel. And as about Periyar, we all know was a revolutionary force. His terrain was malformed. It was from 1930 to 1960s. Put a plethora of extremely progressive, extremely feministic work that take on law, society, gender equally. And they raise very pertinent questions of politics in a society. And he was the pioneer behind the self-respect movement as well. And I think, in my opinion, he was one of those very rare figures who kept his the feminist movement going on. Like, I remember once reading about him that somewhere he wrote that he supports women having children, and within just a span of 2 years, he really went back to his opinion and changed that. And he had no apprehension of doing so, no hesitation whatsoever. And then he wrote that because women in today's society have to carry the possibility or the responsibility of childbearing by themselves, it becomes counterproductive to her rights. Therefore, the reproductive ability that a woman is bestowed with becomes a burden. So, quite a progressive foundation figure we have there. And the second chapter of his book is called Valluvar and Chastity. The first chapter goes on chastity, and in the second chapter, I think Aatika summarized the first chapter, and I will take on from the second one. The second one focuses on this theoretical text, and Periyar brings in various Qurans from there, and then he goes on dissecting them. So, what are Qurans? These are like verses. In contemporary time, we call them principles. And he goes on dissecting them, and he says that they were okay, they were suited to the needs of
Hello,
those.
sister. Just a minute.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, your voice is breaking.
Okay, I'll get closer. Is it okay now?
Yeah, now
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay, so he dissects the Quran one by one, and then he says that those were probably better suited to the needs of those times, written by the people who had much control and authority. But if any layman looks at these verses from any perspective, from any nation, any ethnicity, he probably put in any rational space of his mind, denounce such Qurans, denounce such codes. And he summarizes chastity as not being inherently natural to him. In short, before we start with the discussion, I'd like to do a very small 2-minute exercise with all of you. So I've got a message saying my voice is not louder. Is it louder now? Elia, can you tell me?
Yeah, your voice is very less.
Now?
Yeah, now it is fine.
Yeah, okay. So we'll just do a quick 2-minute exercise. And so I want all of you to imagine one hypothetical situation. In that situation, there is this one woman who's playing in the park with her child. And the child gets injured grievously. And the woman immediately rushes off the child to the hospital. And there at the hospital, the doctor sees the and he hugs her and consoles her. He makes her sit on the chair and he starts patting her shoulder. And he tries to become close to her. I want all of you to answer what would be the possible relationship of the doctor to the woman. Elia, can we start with you?
Yeah, participants can unmute and reply. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, your off part was not clear.
Should I repeat?
Yeah.
Okay. So there is a woman in a hospital. So there's a woman in a park and she's playing with her child. And the child gets grievously injured and the woman rushes him to the hospital. And there, when the doctor sees the woman and the child, he immediately consoles the woman and he hugs her. And the doctor tries consoling her, and the doctor tries to make her sit on a chair and tries to calm her down. So, what could be the possible relationship of the doctor to the woman?
Might be mom or some relation.
And
Yep, that's it.
is there anyone else who wants to make any other guess?
Yeah, participants can unmute and
What if the doctor is empathetic?
No, like we need to know the relationship of the doctor to the woman.
Okay.
Can we know the response of the woman when the doctor consoled and hugged her?
Yeah, she gets consoled. She is relieved. She feels that her child will get treated upon soon.
Okay. Still, we can't make up what the relationship would be. But I am happy that she is consoled.
Thank you, Athira, for your response. I'll move on because we'll not take much time here. The relationship of the doctor to the woman is sister, and they both are sisters, and that's why she tries to console and calms her down. But often in our imagination, the very traditional notion of a doctor is a male, and I am sure some of our minds wandered off to the territory of even harassment. Was the doctor trying to physically harass her in any sense? And I just want to highlight here how gendered our thinking has become and how our conscious patterns we never really interrogate them on a daily basis. Gender and sexuality studies might go on as an academic subject altogether. But what about very intrinsic, very deeply coded norms and behavior that we all have inherently within us? Um, would that call for a look at how patriarchy deeply functions in our society and how Periyar's text is relevant in this context very specifically. Uh, so, in his text, in the very beginning, he says that women are the person who responded to his work said that women are a selfish group. So he specifically wrote that would justice become injustice merely because a selfish group does not accept it. And I mean, it's interesting how many notions are there in this very one sentence itself. There's this question of justice, injustice, of selfishness, of women acting together as a group and placing their own selfish interest in the very center of it. Submission and acceptance. And this brings me to the question of women's morality, their virtue, and whether all these things are an obligatory code in our society, or is it really obligatory for women, or is it just that is it obligatory for both the genders, or for all the genders are there that exist on the spectrum of gender and sexuality? And Periyar tries to highlight here and says that it is definitely not obligatory for women, it is only obligatory for men, wherein they are not bound by the questions of chastity and virtue, and they don't have to act in a certain way, they don't have to dress up in a certain way, talk in a certain way to gain public and private legitimacy, both. And he goes on and he compares the condition of women with that of depressed classes. He says that both these groups, depressed masses and women, were denied access to resources for their development, and therefore they could not have a critical approach and a holistic knowledge network around them. Their knowledge production was curtailed off from the very beginning itself. And this is his reason to justify why women act submissive, why are our mothers obedient, and why do they keep on falling trapped in institutions that are inherently patriarchal and dominant and abusive women like marriage. And it's interesting to see back in 1942, he had extremely radical views of marriage as an institution, wherein he saw that as a contract to mutually consenting adults, and not as something that has been bestowed upon them from a sacred ritualistic process. And they seek legitimacy either from the state or from God. I read in the text he mentions the example of this one poetess called Avai. And in her verses, in her Purans, she says three principles very explicitly. She says that one should not listen to women, ignorance is an ornament on women, and also women are not to be left on their own devices. It's interesting to note here that he's quoting another woman poetess as a response by saying how we all internalize patriarchal norms, how we all start accepting them as the norm, as the socially codified moral conduct that should, in every situation, govern our behavior. And thereby he cites the example of this one Kulaya woman called Adi and one Brahman woman called Bhagwan, and how they both they consummate their marriage, they have children, the myth says, from which the myth of poetess Avi also flows. And it's interesting to see how society views that as a pollution towards the society, as the norm that exists, and not as something that would we would see it as a very progressive caste marriage today. And their children are later abandoned. And so the myths go on and they pile up on existing Brahminical norms of supremacy. And that is why there is continuous negation of women agency, in my opinion. You take this further ahead from these myths, you see how female icons, not just courtesans or poetesses or local people, holy people, but even feministic icons, feministic ideals were portrayed in Tamil Nadu's myths. I haven't read the originals, but from whatever translated versions I've read, it's the exact similar dominant interpretation of female icons being representative of care, love, child rearing, and they stand true to the values of the nation state, to their family, as if their body is always on the line of control, guarding, guarding the sanctorium of honor and shame. And how any institution, be it home, be it school, be it party politics, claims a general natural right to the body of a woman. And Periyar is talking about it back in 1930s. And this is even reflected in contemporary times, how the control over women's body literally dictate everything in our society. And especially if you look at it from an anti-caste lens, it's very interesting to note further that he also mentions about the philosophical moorings of gender and what those could be. How has gender come to be construed in, say, philosophy? Like from a personal example, I would tell you how medicine treats women Women are often misdiagnosed, and there is no name for the diseases that women continue to suffer from. And specifically, indigenous group of women, a subset of women, say black women, Dalit women, disabled women, queer women, it goes on. And philosophy then gives them the name of hysteria, abnormal, uncommon, which we are basically either deviants or we are basically unfit. We don't have an agency. And that is where I go back to what Abai had put back then. She said that women are not to be left to their own devices. I wonder how is that really difficult from today's philosophical construction. Not that every construction of philosophy portrays women like that, but almost on all literary canons and all progressive institutions don't have a very holistic understanding of gender and sexuality, I must say. Especially the very nuance of it, the gray areas of abuse, trauma, mental health, these are all escaped. And the public conscious continues to have a very typical narration of women in the mind. Take, for example, literature. All literary canons, women have a very peculiar relationship, according to me, with literature. If you talk about women and literature, and specifically if you want to talk about Dalit women and literature, or a subset like that, marginalized community, where, for example, I read once that a person had written that this is a very seminal text. Why were women enslaved? Is a seminal text of Periyar. If you look at the structure of the word seminal, it comes from the word semen, which we know to be completely related to the man's reproductive organs, and how a word that should ideally connote a great masterstroke, a great work that weighs heavy, that has a lot of material, is in depth richly, is called seminal, and how we have never really questioned that, and all our words flow from such an understanding. So I refuse to call it seminal. I'll call it Megna Carta of women's liberation. And literature continues to guide us in ways that often go beyond the common way we look at it. If we go further ahead, Periyar is also questioning divinity throughout. He's denying the existence of God. And from that, he said there are certain law-giving texts. And because in most of family law, or things that, or any law that caters to any personal right of a human being, you find an inherent male right, although that word is nowhere used. For example, all the words, English words would be masculine, from history to, say, menfolk and all of that. And he said that not just this, but if you look at all the laws who give the male an inherent right to dominate, and this inherent male right is very specifically distinguished from the female right to own or to create or to reproduce, you will exactly see that there is no existence of God at all. To also base the argument on divine sanction, that we are saying this, that men are given this from each other because Adam was like that, and then it is written in the Quran like that, in the Gita like that, any religious scripture like that, is to take divine sanction for something that doesn't truly exist. And he keeps on questioning, he keeps on the usage of the word male right, and he keeps on distinguishing it. He says that not just because women and men function reproductively differently does not mean that their rights and their fundamental duties have to be different from each other. He said that also this concept was largely brought into usage when there was the period of Aryan domination in India. And he uses a Tamil word called Parapana, which means Brahman. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. He says that there is no use citing all these Qurans that give you this entrenched male right, like a Quran, and going on without questioning what lies at the root of these very verses that have created a society of such an intrinsic inequality between all of us. Also, in my opinion, this is also like how Hinduism ritualizes the non-consent of women. It goes on by ritualizing certain specific norms in our society, and how women are often delegated from that space or negated from that space, and that only determines the right to existence, inheritance, succession, everything. Um, this very specific thing I would like to call ritualizing non-consent. Also, something that really struck me while reading this was how do we look at textual fidelity? This textual fidelity means, so because I was reading a translated version, I cannot read the original Tamil one. I was continuously thinking it from also the viewpoint of the translator, Meena Kandasamy, and how her own politics has shaped her own work, and and she has those beautiful, delightful metaphors that really come up in all of her poetic works, in which she continuously negates to see women as either divine or as completely lowly, which is also known as the Madonna whore dichotomy. Either you look up to her as a Madonna or you look up to her as a whore. And that is also because you're also playing into the male gaze. You've not really construed any canon and any philosophy or literature that would also talk about how women's emancipation happened through their own gaze towards themselves. Can we have a look at ourselves, at our own bodies, our own labor? And because she's translated it, the original title of this work was "Why Did Woman Become a Slave?" The way it is framed, it hints at a modicum of choice, a modicum of agency. There is a hint to it. And Meena Kandasamy took some liberation and she framed it otherwise. She just twisted it a bit and she said, why were women enslaved? As if there was no choice, which also happens to be true. And then she says that textual fidelity is also another patriarchal construct. Just like that is why she's changed the title and she's taken some further, she's done some further changes to the text in which the message hits you very sharp, it hits you very clearly. There is no messing around with the words. And to realize that even such a thing, coming from a translation to reading and thinking about the original and then talking it about to people, can also play into patriarchy. It's such an interesting thing to note, and how everyday
Yeah.
yes,
Sorry for the interruption.
yes, Ilaya.
Yes, your voice is not clear. Yeah.
Okay, now
Yeah, now it is fine. Yeah.
okay. Also, like again, I will bring my thing back to chastity. If you actually think of chastity, uh, isn't it biologically a myth of the hymen that women have a hymen and upon entering into a contract of marriage, the legally wedded husband, because of the act of intercourse, would break that hymen and then she becomes the property of the husband to be devoured, to be taken as he wishes to, with no choice of her own. And all religious scriptures back this myth of hymen, which is time and again proven wrong by various medical experts. And then how do we construct this word called chastity? Do we look at it from the standpoint of a structure, or do we look at it from the standpoint of any ideological framework, like Marxist, radical feminist? And what is the emancipatory role of sex in our own society? What role does it play? To this, Periyar has an answer. Periyar goes on to say that firstly, if you keep aside morality, virtue, all these things, you can also look at chastity from three other angles, which could be true chastity, natural chastity, and independent chastity. So, true, natural, and independent. And all of these three, they really provide you a space wherein you can build on agency. You can take independent action to your criteria and then think, okay, if a woman herself wants to not have sex, and it is these very specific small nuances that we need to build into our society and into our laws to take into account consent and how women would like their bodies to be seen and governed, if at all. And he ends it with two, like he's in the middle, he's referencing that usually the qualities that are associated with males are valor, hardness, anger, and domination. And with female, it is love, softness, peace, caring. But to look at it from this viewpoint will not lead us to a point where we can talk about the growth of human society together, collectively, as a collective in which rights are derived not out of any reproductive organs, but rights are derived out of your very basic mere existence. So that you can ask the state and the government for social welfare, you can assert that right, and there is a middle ground where everyone has a right to housing, to medical access, to food, all basic needs are met. And this only highlights how important, how relevant, how contemporary and international appeal Periyar has, for me at least. Because he's thinking of all these things at that time, and it is till today in the late capitalistic stage, we haven't been able to really assertively demand a fully socialistic state, wherein all these rights are not just rights, they are just the duties of state, and they are met without having to go to streets to protest and having the calls for abolish the police, defund the police, all of this. He further goes on and he says that this difference between male right and female right, which we were discussing before, is also not natural to nature's design. Because as we all know, things like, say, homophobia does not exist in a lot of species. It's completely it's only in us. And with inequality and division of labor only growing, at least in my opinion, I see things like homophobia, exclusion, discrimination would only reach a very natural, a very state-sanctioned state under neoliberal capitalism, especially if you have a fascist government at the center. Also, he says that in the end, he writes very sarcastically, it seems like a radical insult to me, which comes from the tradition of Fule, that it is stupidity to have an opinion different from that of the majority. And I mean, this really needs no elaboration. This is almost borrowing into how fascist authoritative narratives work, where you cannot dissent, you cannot be any different, you are a homogeneous mass. Especially if you look at it from the lens of how Hindutva is being imposed on us right now through every policy, through every organization, every structure that exists comes back to us and haunts us in every patriarchal, in every fascist way that it can. And this only means that Periyar's words are coming true. That if you don't put an man-made, unjust, discriminatory differences between us, the whetstone of inequality would only divide us further. I think I will end my summarization here. I'm more or less done. Elia, can I have you back?
Yeah.
What do we do? Do we proceed with questions? If
Hello,
there are...
everyone.
Yes.
Yeah. So, if you anybody have any questions, like where you want to interpret or you want to share your views, that you can share. Now our speaker has finished their talk. Yeah. You can unmute and ask participants. Yeah. So, meantime, I have a query that,
Yes.
yeah. So actually, my straightforward why I plan to invite you is that the person who don't know Tamil can like directly review the book. We can have a critics from directly from you that even if somebody know Tamil, they may read the Tirukural and they may have some kind of special interest on that, so that they cannot critically review on it. So how you felt that? How you felt with the Tirukural? Means that poem.
Thank you for the question, Elia. My I have a disadvantage that I cannot read the original, which stands to as you have highlighted. But also, most of these scriptures and text dating back to 19th, 18th century, they have the same rot at their cause. Either it is gender or it is caste. So not really different from the scriptures that I've read in my own home and my own place, but very similar to the values that I've seen in them. But it was intellectually challenging also to sort of come closer and develop a fiduciary relationship with the text that you cannot ever read in original. Uh, especially when we all live in the era of post-truth, and translations therefore deny you that truth, that possibility that you're looking for of any rationality. But also because I've engaged with Meena Kandaswamy before and her words do speak true to me, I found this translation easy to chew on, and this was bringing home a lot of points to me, especially points that now we can use in the feminist movement. And something that I've deeply felt is also that classics have to be reinterpreted and reread with the possibilities of our time. Also because urgency always has the stakes of truth, and a lot of feminist interpretation is needed, not just for these texts, but also for how they are how they are accepted as a source of authority in our society. So that
Yeah, yeah.
does my
Thank you.
answer satisfy your question, Elia?
Yeah, yeah. So anybody would like to ask any queries, like or would like to share any point? Yeah. Hello, sir. Vinayam, sir.
Tell me, Leah. I'm there.
Yeah. I would like to share any points. So,
I think first of all, I would say thank you for a wonderful presentation. I just was last her name. What's her name?
My name's Aatika.
Aatika. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Actually, what is I didn't listen to the first presentation on chastity. It's fine, but this particular chapter, the chapter 2, Valluvar and chastity, had very close connection with chapter 1, the chastity. If someone knows Tamil and who can read the text without any translation, quote and unquote, may feel that this particular chapter, chapter 2, Valluvar and chastity, is a kind of interruption from outside.
Yeah.
I don't know whether what to say you felt the way what to say I felt it or not, but the chapter 2 is a kind of what to say interruption from outside. Why would say all of the sudden Periyar, when he starts his views with chastity, and all of the sudden enter into a Valluvar and chastity? Why would he wants to discuss about a particular man called Valluvar? And the immediate next chapter talks about love, and then what is it, marriage and the widowhood and all other things, right? So if we practically, if you were to say remove the chapter 2, and it has a coherence, it has a connection. The first chapter talks about chastity, and after that, the love. Obviously, what is the entire idea of love is invariably related to the idea of chastity, and then marriage, remarriage, widowhood, whether what is we should accept masculinity or not. So everything is well connected, except the chapter 2. Here, in this particular chapter, he was discussing about a particular man, Valluvar's views on chastity and related other things. Why Periyar is all of a sudden holding on a man called Valluvar and trying to explain his views in this chapter is a very interesting area to look at. So my personal reading on this text will make me conclude that actually what I say, he wrote this chapter as a rebuttal, as an answer to a Tamil scholar. His name is, if I'm not wrong, Paramasiva Mudaliyar. Probably, yes, right. His name is Paramasiva Mudaliyar. So before what I say, we are entering into these issues. Why would say he wrote this particular chapter? So what is the significance this particular chapter holds? We have to understand the nature of the text. Actually, it was not prepared as a book, as a booklet as such. The way would say we are reading it now. It was serialized at the beginning, the 1928, the January 1928, he started to write the first chapter. And then it goes on almost 8 months. 12/8 to the 28, would say that the last chapter, 10th chapter was written. That was published in Periyar back then. Okay, it was serialized in the magazine, right? So a monthly, would say 2 or 3 articles are started appearing gradually. So in between, after writing the first chapter, the chapter or treatise on Kalpa, a man named Paramasiva Mudaliyar wrote back to Periyar. And he registered his views against Periyar's views on chastity, a kind of rebuttal to Periyar's thoughts on chapter 1. And then it was published in the same Kudiyarasu a week after Periyar wrote back to this Paramasiva Mudaliyar. It's an answer to his queries. So it's more or like the interpretation of the old text called Tirukkural, wrote by Valluvar. In the first chapter, Periyar used 2 Tirukkural couplets to substantiate his own views on chastity. So that was refused by Paramasiva Mudaliyar by giving different interpretation to those 2 couplets. Again, Periyar, in this particular chapter, tries to discuss the problems in the way the Paramasiva Mudaliyar trying to understand those couplets. So more or like this chapter is more on interpretations than the so-called content, the quote unquote, the actual content. So in the peripheral look, we may feel that this particular chapter is not an organic or integral part of the textual series or textual line. But if you look at carefully, if you read carefully, it gives the way in the early 20th century, a so-called Tamil intellectual trying to understand or trying to interpret the old text in support of their own views. The views which were guided by religious canon down the centuries. So here, Periyar is it's completely modernist in a sense that he never subscribed any old values just per se. He was problematizing the text and trying to understand the text in the modern light and trying to say, bring down the text to the 20th century audience. So not only he problematized with the critic, the Paramasiva's views, but also he exposed the way the 20th century intellectual were trying to imagine or understand, suit their own quote unquote the age-old views. Okay, it's very important in that angle. So it's more of like what to say, the interpretations against the interpretations which was followed over the centuries, more or like the false views, the false myths. So yeah, even without this chapter, we can get the sense of the text, no doubt about it. But this particular chapter is integrally connected with the first chapter, the idea of chastity. How the idea of chastity was down the ages propagated and how it was looked differently by Periyar in 20th, the first part of 28th century. So it talks about two different viewpoints, two different interpretative possibility of the notion which was believed, practiced down the centuries. In 20th century, the one who wrote against Periyar was holding the age-old interpretative status. In Periyar, with modern light, trying to understand the concept of karpu, the chastity, in a different standpoint. By doing so, he wants to rationalize, he wants to try to understand the entire idea of karpu in a more quote-unquote broad and intellectual perspectives. So in that angle, this chapter is I feel also it's a very mandatory chapter to this text. And at the same time, without this chapter, we can read the text without any interruptions. That means with flow, we can read this text as well. Fine. So I'm happy that what to say I can listen about this chapter from non-Tamilian's mouth. Thank you for that, Aatika.
Thank you, Vinegam. That was pretty useful information you were providing about the background of the second chapter and what went into it. Also, Periyar writes, Periyar starts the chapter by saying a comrade has responded in a long counter to our essay on chastity with quotations from Thirukural. So therefore it becomes necessary to engage in the tradition of debate and dissent that I think most of our philosophical leaders follow from. It's not the time of today that you troll and you cut off people and you block them at the end of the day. This comes from a tradition wherein you want to answer questions in a healthy way and you want to substantiate them further. Also, I would like to mention one specific thing here. So it comes from there's a social concept and it is grounded in Marxist critical theory, and it focuses on achieving an in-depth understanding of the world, allowing for the perception and exposure of perceived social and political contradictions. This thing is called conscientization. And I think that is where the second chapter becomes extremely important, and it provides an essence, not just on chastity, but it also binds the book together. So that.
Yeah, so I think we will end the session. Thank you, Aatika. So thank you for your wonderful discussion that we have live streamed the event. So if anybody would like to watch the event, they can search Google's Periyar Screen. We have YouTube channel as well as Facebook, Twitter accounts. They can follow. So our next chapter review will be on the next week. It is love. So the third chapter. Please do join for the third chapter review also. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.